What's going on, YouTube? Thanks for coming back and checking out the Fat Guy Builds. Today we're doing a clutch twin disc 1000 horsepower on the Mustang here, and just gonna go through this step by step. Here's some tools you're gonna need. Pilot bearing puller. There's a part number. You're gonna need one of these things here to hold the flywheel. Slide hammer to use with this puller to pull it out. Then we got some parts. Throwout bearing here, BR3Z-7A508-B. Pilot bearing. Now this is a heavy load bearing. They have two versions of this. This is M-7600-C. This is the high load version, and then there's a standard version. And then we got here ARP fasteners for the flywheel, 156-2801. Got another thing from Lethal Performance, UPR, hydraulic clutch cable, stainless steel braided. This is going to upgrade the factory one. 3012-01 is the part number. Remove the positive terminal on your battery. Unscrew the shift knob. Pull off these side panels on both sides. Remove these two screws with a 7mm. So we need to pop the center console off. You want to start in the back. Use a panel popper like this. You're going to push straight up here on both sides. Unclip those, and then you're going to work your way around. Unclip, unclip, until you get, there's the last clip about here, roughly. Once all the clips are disconnected, you need to disconnect these two wiring harnesses. Unclip the shifter reverse lockout piece. There's little tabs. Pull the tabs, that way you can pull the silver piece out. And then you'll remove your insulation. Yours is going to probably look different than mine. You're going to remove the shifter boot and everything, because on the stock shifter it's going to go through the bottom. On mine I have the Barton, so I'm going to disconnect it from the top. Now that I have my shifter out here, I can go and do everything else under the car. If you have a stock shifter, all you need to make sure you have the boot and all the insulation and stuff to where it's as open as possible. Alright, now we're going to have to undo the exhaust. So 15mm here. You're going to take it off here. And we're going to take it off at the back of this H-pipe, which yours is probably welded if it's stock, which means you got to take the whole back off. If you have an aftermarket H-pipe or X-pipe or whatever, then you can take it apart here. Use a 13mm, remove the main wire from the starter. Use a 10mm ratcheting wrench or socket, remove this wire from the starter. Use a 10mm socket with an extension and remove the two 10mm. There's one here and one on top. There's actually 3 bolts in this, so make sure you get all 3. 2 towards the top, 1 on the bottom. Use some kind of lubricant. Unclip the wiring harness for the O2 sensor, and then remove the 2 rear O2 sensors. Alright, we're going to unclip all the sensors, and we're going to pop off all the harness locations where they're at. Just use a panel popper. Use an 18mm, remove the bolts that attach the drive shaft to the transmission. You're going to have somebody up top to pull the e-brake a bunch of times. But what we're going to do is take a 10mm, loosen the bolts that we can get to, take them out, rotate the drive shaft with the e-brake off, and get the rest of them. Use a 13mm, remove these 2 bolts from the center carrier, and then you can pull the drive shaft out. Support the transmission, and then remove the 4 bolts that hold the cross frame. Remove these 2 13mm nut with the stud, 1 on each side. Use a 15mm to remove this nut here. Get a 2-foot extension, an elbow, and a deep 15mm socket. There's a little metal clip on the clutch line. pull that metal clip out and the clutch line will be disconnected. Use a 13mm socket, wrench, whatever you got that'll do the job. Start going around, break all these transmission bolts loose. When you hook up your stand, make sure you strap it nice and tight. That way you don't have any issues. The stocker's still together. I only have 26,000 miles, so it is what it is. But we're gonna start taking this apart, removing these bolts all the way around. You're gonna use a 19mm to loosen these, and you're gonna need one of these tools to hold the flywheel. Once these are all loose, take a drill and pop them out. We're gonna use a slide hammer to pull out this pilot bearing because we have a new one that came with the kit. So we got this tool for 15 bucks from AutoZone. You put it in, we're gonna tighten this, and then slide hammer this shit out. I used a 1 1/16 inch socket, and that fit like perfectly around the edge. And I pounded it in slowly that way until it's flush. Now that it's flush, I'm going to grab the new flywheel and put it in. The high load forward bearing has a thicker lip here. Kind of freaked me out because I was like, oh, it's not going in all the way, but it's a thicker, overall thicker bearing. Make sure the threads are cleaned, and then you're gonna take this, which is your crank trigger. It only fits on one way. This little thing here goes into this hole. So do it like that. Make sure it's flush. Make sure it's not all cockeyed or something. Look who we have. Project No Rice. We found a good shop in Albuquerque to tune finally. So it's making pretty good power now. Anyways, we are cleaning all the brake dust out of here. And then I'm gonna start putting the clutch back in, the new one. Here's the clutch I'm using. It's a Lethal Performance clutch and flywheel. This is a twin disc. And then I'm using the LPXHD. And this is supposed to be like the 1,000 horsepower model twin disc. So since this isn't going to be like a daily, I'm not too worried about how it's, you know, going to feel. Anyways, you have your spline plastic deal here to line up the clutch straight. Cardboard, paper, and yep. And then the twin disc here. Here's the new clutch. LPXHD, so this should hold 1,000 horsepower. So first thing we got to do is take this apart with a 14mm. Remove these nuts all the way around. That'll get your pressure plate off. Just in case you forget how these washers go, you have this little gold washer, then you have a split washer, and then you have the nut. So they actually mark the clutch disc. So just keep it stacked up the way it was. Now we're gonna have to take off the second plate to get to this clutch disc, and they mark it. Make sure you put it back together. You have the marking in the right spot. The nuts on the second plate are all 13mm. So there's shims, little shims and stuff here. ACT doesn't actually do this for you. These guys do it for you. ACT gives you a whole bunch of shims and they tell you to measure, and you got to put it together and tear it apart 50 million times. So take some tape, tape these on so they don't fall off, and then we'll install this onto the engine. And then right before we put on the second plate, we're going to take the tape off. Just like this. Tape's wrapped around. This stuff's not going to fall off. For the bolts that hold the flywheel on, you're going to put blue thread locker on the threads. Then on the bottom side of the head, the bolt head, you're going to put this lubricant on the bottom side. So you put the blue Loctite in the threads, put the grease on the bottom side of the head, and then just install it. So for this kit, it's 70 foot-pounds is what we're going to torque it to. And we're going to torque it in a star pattern like you would lug nuts on a wheel. Now you have everything torqued down. We're going to spray the flywheel here. I want to cover up my pilot bearing because I don't want it to get all, you know, brake cleaned out. But we're going to just spray here and get any oil or protectant or whatever on the flywheel off, just like you do when you do a set of brakes and you got to clear off the brake rotor. You're going to grab your first disc and your tool. You're going to put the tool through the disc, slide it in, and just leave it like that for right this second. Now we're going to remove the tape and put the second plate on, and put the nuts on these three here with the shims, and tighten it down. Just go on both sides, spray some brake cleaner real quick so if any oil is on the surface, it's nice and clean. I remove the tape and then line up this plate, making sure to line up Lethal Performance's blue mark so that it's clocked the same way. Here are the torque specs. I don't know if it's blurry. The floater plate, 25 foot-pounds. Pressure plate, 35 foot-pounds. And it says flywheel to crank, 65 foot-pounds. But that's if you're running like a factory bolt. The ARP ones say 70, so you do it to whatever the bolt manufacturer says. So when you have the plate on, you're going to put the split washer. I'm going to put blue Loctite on the threads here. And then we're going to put on the nut. And just do them hand tight, all three of them like this first. Now we're going to take this out. We're going to take this. We have this one torqued down to the 25 foot-pounds with the Loctite. Then you put the second disc and the first disc, and you're going to just get it nice and set. And then now we can go to the pressure plate. On the pressure plate, we're going to do the same thing because it's metal and it can have oil on it for storage purposes and all that. So we're just going to go around, give it a nice little dry off, and put this on. This one was also clocked. You see the blue? So you're going to line this up with the blue that was already on there as well. I'm putting Loctite, blue Loctite on these threads as well. And then we're going to do a star pattern. And the end torque will be 35 foot-pounds. But right now, I'm just going to go this, you know, across. Just do a star like this. Do it by hand until I can't tighten it by hand anymore. But all at the same time I'm doing that, I'm holding this thing here to where it's perfectly, all the disc material is perfectly flush and this thing is straight. So you'll know it's right if this thing slips in and out nice and easy. Now that everything's lined up with this clutch, next step is I'm gonna bleed I'm actually gonna pre-fill the slave cylinder on the bench, and I'm gonna show you how to do that, and then mount that, and then we're gonna just toss the transmission back on. Reverse all the steps of what we did to take the transmission out to put the transmission back on. Use an 8mm and remove the two bolts that hold the slave cylinder. Use a flathead, pull this clip out, then you can remove this housing from the line on the inside. To release this clip from here, there's two little pegs on the inside that lock in. So you just have to take a flathead from the inside and pop them. Alright, grab your .4 fluid. See how this moves? So what we're going to do is squeeze this out. It'll push all the air out. And then as it's in the fluid, it's going to suck it back in. Put the new one in, bolt it back in. I used a little blue Loctite. Put this plastic clip back on. Push that metal clip back in. And then hold it from the inside while you press fit this back on. And there should be a little bit of an angle this way, but almost straight up. Alright, you take this pink shit, put it in the threads on the splines. And then this will be ready to slide in and put it back together. Gonna install the clutch line. So we already had this one disconnected, obviously, because we took the transmission out, right? So now we're gonna have to go all the way up to the brake master cylinder where this thing plugs in and disconnect it up there. Take out all these screws. We need to take this panel off because putting the transmission back in, the engine's not tilted enough like it was when I pulled the transmission out. So I'm going to push up on the crank to tilt the engine down to get the transmission on easier. Make sure the transmission's flush with the motor. Tighten down all the bolts pretty evenly, and then go ahead and torque them down after, once you verify everything's flush. Now we're going to run the wiring back over. There's some stuff like this I'm going to retape. And then this goes over and on the other side. So we're going to do that right now. Once you have the bell housing ones put in, go ahead and put these 13s and reinstall these and clip this onto here. So the worst part of this whole job so far was getting the clutch line reinstalled, getting my fat arm in here and pulling the clutch line down far enough. Obviously, if you push the clutch transmission up, it's easier to plug in because you have more length. Problem is, if you push up the transmission, you can't fit your freaking arm in there. So anyways, just get in there and finagle it. Once you hear it click, it's done. And then raise up the transmission with a transmission stand or jack or whatever. Reinstall the transmission mount cross brace. Put your 3 bolts in. Put your massive starter back in. Tighten down the 3 bolts once you got them all snug. And put these 2 plastic panels back. Reinstall this side exhaust pipe. Leave this clamp a little loose so you can move this. Then we're going to reinstall the drive shaft. Put your exhaust back together, tighten it up, and we're done under the car. Reinstall the battery terminal.